Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into the Hizmet movement.
Right.
Specifically, how they've kind of navigated all the changes and challenges they've faced recently.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at this through the lens of muammer burtaçgiray's work,
Okay.
Pasted Text, I believe it's called.
Pasted text, yes.
And he kind of offers, I think, a really insightful perspective on how the movement has evolved.
Yeah, he really hones in on, that whole forced migration from Turkey
Right.
and how that was like this really pivotal moment for them.
Yeah, so jumping right into the heart of it.
Yeah.
I mean, for a movement that was so much about, like, giving and service,
Mm-hmm.
what did this forced displacement, like, what did that do to them internally?
Yeah, burtaçgiray, he really highlights this sort of like abrupt shift,
Okay.
from giving to all of a sudden being the ones who need to receive.
Oh, wow.
And you can imagine if, like, your whole identity is built around, providing aid, education, doing all this good stuff in the world, and then suddenly you're the one who needs the support.
Yeah.
That really forces you to grapple with, like, some fundamental questions about your role and purpose.
Yeah. So how did they respond to that? Did it cause, like, fracturing within the movement, or was there unity?
Well, there were definitely challenges. But what's really fascinating is that they kind of drew on, like, their existing principles
Okay.
to kind of, like, navigate this whole new reality.
Right.
And, we've talked about this before, like Gulen's concept of the universe as a book.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yes.
And it's not just about studying scripture or, religious texts.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea of, like, engaging with the world around you,
Yeah.
constantly learning and adapting.
Yeah, that's something I've always found interesting about the Hizmet movement is how much they seem to embrace this idea of, like, lifelong learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Applying their values in new situations and new contexts.
Exactly. And, this mindset, I think, proved to be really crucial during this period of, like, forced migration.
Yeah.
Because instead of kind of retreating inwards, which you could see happening in that kind of situation,
Sure.
they really focused on how can we integrate
Okay.
into these new societies that we're finding ourselves in.
Right.
And it wasn't about, assimilation or losing their identity.
Right.
It was about how can we contribute while also, holding on to who we are.
Okay, but hold on a second. Didn't they already kind of have this history of, like, international expansion before this?
That's a good point.
I'm thinking about, like, those schools they established in Central Asia back in the 90s.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
So that's, like, a completely different thing then.
And burtaçgiray actually, he really highlights this contrast
Okay.
between those, like, earlier efforts, which were kind of, voluntary,
Right.
and this more recent migration, which was driven by necessity.
Right. Yeah.
So those earlier expansions, they were largely about spreading Gulen's teachings and kind of, establishing a presence in these regions where there were, like, shared cultural or religious ties.
So it was almost more about, like, expanding their reach.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas this forced migration really forced them to rethink their whole approach.
Precisely.
It wasn't just about setting up schools or cultural centers anymore.
Right.
It was about, like, okay, how do we learn new languages? How do we acquire new skills?
Right.
How do we, like, navigate these legal systems, these democratic countries like Europe and North America?
Right. These whole new contexts.
Yeah, like Australia.
Yeah.
It's a huge shift.
Huge shift.
And I imagine, like, that integration process wasn't exactly easy, right?
No.
Did burtaçgiray, like, talk about any of the specific challenges they face?
Oh, he definitely did. He talks about, the struggle to acclimate
Okay.
to new cultures, new social norms,
Right.
Trying to hold on to their values
Right.
while also navigating this new reality.
Yeah.
He even, like, cautions against forming these isolated communities.
Okay.
Uses the term, like, ghettos, right?
Oh.
And he's really urging them to engage
Yeah.
with the wider world.
So it's not just about, like, passive existence in these new societies.
Right.
It's about active participation.
Exactly.
Did he give any examples of what that kind of engagement might look like?
Oh, yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting. He goes beyond just saying, like, integrate, He gives some concrete steps,
Okay.
like specific actions he thinks the movement should be taking.
Okay, lay it on me.
So he talks about establishing NGOs,
Okay.
like, to tackle social issues,
All right.
collaborating with people
Outside the movement.
outside the movement, exactly,
Interesting.
like-minded individuals, and then also, really creating opportunities for the younger generation
Okay.
to engage in meaningful ways.
Okay. I'm really curious about this whole NGO thing.
Yeah.
Did he give any specific examples of, like, Hizmet-affiliated NGOs and what kind of work they're doing?
Yeah, he talks about, like, the Rumi Forum,
Oh, okay.
which is based in Washington, D.C.
Right, right. I've heard of them.
And they've been really active in, like, promoting interfaith dialogue
Oh, interesting.
and
Yeah.
understanding. They host conferences, and they do a lot of publishing,
Okay.
and they really focus on these topics,
Yeah.
like religious freedom, conflict resolution.
Wow, so they're engaging with some pretty, like, heavyweight stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Would you say that's a good example of, like, putting that universe as a book concept into action?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They're not just, like, studying different faiths, right?
Yeah.
They're actually creating spaces
Right.
for dialogue, for collaboration. They're actually putting that knowledge into action.
And what about collaborating with, like, people outside the movement?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like a pretty bold step for a group that, historically has been kind of insular.
Yeah.
Was he saying, like, work with anyone, or did he have specific types of collaborations in mind?
He was talking about working with groups that share their values,
Okay.
even if they come from, like, different religious backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds.
Oh.
He mentions, like, secular humanist organizations
Gotcha.
that are also committed to, like, social justice, human rights, that kind of thing.
Right. So it's not about, like, diluting their own beliefs.
Exactly.
It's more about, like, finding that common ground.
Exactly. It's like, how can we work together to create a more just and compassionate world?
I see. Yeah.
And, that really ties back to what Gulen always emphasized, that dialogue and understanding.
Yeah.
Like, he believed that engaging with different perspectives actually strengthens your own faith,
Oh, interesting.
helps you find solutions.
I can see that. This whole interfaith collaboration thing, it's really intriguing.
Yeah.
But did burtaçgiray address, like, the potential risks?
He did.
Because, I can imagine some members might be worried about, like, losing their identity
Absolutely.
or compromising their values by, like, working too closely with outsiders.
He acknowledged those concerns, for
Yeah.
sure. And he really emphasizes that, integration shouldn't lead to assimilation.
Right.
He's not saying, like, abandon your beliefs,
Right.
abandon your practices.
So it's about finding that balance
Exactly.
between, like, preserving your identity and engaging with the wider world.
Yeah, and that's where he really sees the younger generation as, like, crucial.
Oh, okay.
They're the bridge builders.
We can kind of navigate these complexities.
Exactly. They've grown up in these diverse societies.
That makes sense.
They're kind of well-equipped.
So did he offer any, like, concrete ways for them to engage?
Oh, yeah, and this is where he gets really specific. He really challenges these young people to, like, go beyond those kind of classical methods of engagement.
Beyond classical methods, what does that even mean?
He's saying, like, you got to think outside the box.
Yeah. Okay.
Find these innovative ways to connect with your communities.
Like what? Can you give me, like, a concrete example?
Okay, so he suggests, like, getting involved in human rights activism, advocating for marginalized communities, promoting social justice.
Yeah.
He also talks a lot about environmental awareness,
Okay.
sustainability,
Yeah.
like becoming stewards of the planet.
That's not something you typically hear, like, associated with, religious movements.
Right, exactly.
It's like he's pushing them to really broaden their definition of service.
Yeah.
Engage with all these, like, contemporary global issues.
Exactly. And he even goes a step further and says, look into technology,
Okay.
innovation. Use your skills to develop solutions to, like, these pressing social problems.
So it's almost like he's encouraging them to be, like, active citizens in the truest sense of the word,
Yes.
contributing their skills and knowledge to make their communities and the world a better place.
Exactly. And he makes this point that these values, they shouldn't just be, like, trendy things that you adopt for a little while.
Right.
He's like, this should be the core of who you are. This is your philosophy of life.
It's almost like they're being encouraged to become living embodiments of that universe as a book concept.
Yeah.
Like, they're not just studying the world, they're actively participating in it.
Exactly. And, it's really inspiring to see how, like, this movement has gone from, facing persecution and exile
Right.
to now actively shaping their new environments,
Yeah.
contributing their unique perspective, their experiences to create a more inclusive and just world.
I mean, talk about turning challenge into opportunity.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful message for all of us, I think.
It is, and it leaves us with, like, these important questions.
Yeah.
Like, how can we, in our own lives, embrace this whole universe as a book concept?
Right.
How can we contribute to the well-being of humanity and all creation?
That's a great question, something for all of us to think about. I
Yeah.
think the Hizmet movement, their story, it offers us like a roadmap for navigating these really complicated times.
Mhm.
They've shown us what resilience looks like, the importance of adapting,
For sure.
the power of human connection.
Absolutely. And as they continue to evolve and contribute to that global conversation,
Mhm.
I think their story will continue to inspire
Yeah.
and challenge us all.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the Hizmet movement. Thanks for joining us. We hope you'll continue to explore their journey. It's a fascinating one.
Until next time.
Take care.